So in 2020, I read 1,000 non-fiction books, and I want to break down the 5 things that I did in order to be able to do that, because when you can speed read like that, it's honestly a superpower. I should note early on that when I say speed read, I don't mean I read these books from cover to cover. I view that as the old-fashioned way of reading. I'll break down the new and more efficient way of reading that I've been doing in steps 3 and 4. Step 1 is to align the frontal lobe with reading. Let me explain what that means. If I told you to sit down and every single day of your life, you were going to read McDonald's corporate reports for 5 to 6 hours every single day, would you do it? The answer is obviously no. I can't think of anything more boring or more tedious than combing through what McDonald's has been doing in their financials. I just don't care. The reason you wouldn't do that is because you wouldn't think it's worth your time. Why would be the question you'd ask. But Warren Buffett spends 5 to 6 hours a day reading the corporate reports of companies like McDonald's and similar companies because he thinks that it's beneficial to do it. So the very first step is to understand whether or not reading is something that's worth your time, because humans have been evolutionary designed over the course of the past 200,000 years to conserve energy. We're not going to expend energy unless we think it's worth it. You don't see humans running around going from point A to B in a very long-winded way. If their goal is to get somewhere, they take the most efficient way to get there. Humans are designed to conserve energy. And we have a limited amount of time. So how we use our time therefore becomes incredibly valuable. It's a finite resource. And just because everybody else says that reading's productive doesn't mean that it actually is. So many people say that so many things are productive when in reality they're just distractions and they're not worth doing. So the first thing that I did was really sat down and figure out whether reading was worth my time. If I was going to be dedicating a large proportion of my life to reading, is it worth it? So the very first thing I did was I sat down and started researching what is the return on investment in a time sense for reading. And the more I researched into this topic, the more I discovered that the return on investment for reading is far greater than most people think, for a few different reasons. Instead of making you do the research, I'll break down the key takeaway points that I found when I was doing this research about why reading was worth doing. The first point is that it's what all of the busiest people on the planet do. Warren Buffett spends 5 to 6 hours a day reading. Bill Gates literally takes a week out of his year just to read and to think. And Oprah Winfrey credits much of her success to reading, and Ben Franklin spent at least an hour or 2 hours a day reading. The busiest people on this planet read, and think about it. Think how difficult it is for you to find time to read on a day-to-day basis. Then think about how difficult it must be for them to read on a day-to-day basis. They have more people demanding their time than anyone else. Just think about how difficult it would be for you to be able to get an hour-long conversation with them. It would be almost impossible, well, because some of them are dead, but the alive people even still, it would be incredibly difficult, and that shows how valuable their time is. So the busiest people, the people that could be spending their time on hundreds of other activities, carve out time in their daily schedule to read. And there must be a reason for this. It would be easier for them to just spend more time on their to-do list, but instead, all of them carve out time to read. They don't do this by accident. There is a reason. And I would say there are 2 main reasons why they do this. The first one is that learning is the definition of delayed gratification. It is actually short-term unproductive to be reading. When you sit down and you learn or you read, you're taking time away from the productive things that you could be doing on your to-do list. In the short run, reading is definitely unproductive. But in the long run, that's where all of the benefits from reading come. It's an investment in yourself. Think about it. Whatever your goal is, whatever it is that you want to achieve, whatever it is you want to do, whoever it is that you want to become, all of that becomes so much easier when you have wisdom. When you have wisdom, when you see truth, the path to get to where you want to get to becomes remarkably simple. And most of the things that you're currently doing with your time, you recognize that they're going in the wrong direction. All of this action that's being taken isn't the specific actions that need to be taken to get from where you are to where you want to get to. When you have wisdom, you get so much clarity on the things, the very few things that you need to be doing to where you want to get to, and therefore it becomes so much more simple for you to reach your goals. It goes from hard work to simple, easy work when you have the specific plan you need to take to get to where you want to get to. And not only is reading an investment in yourself, Ben Franklin said that investment in knowledge pays the best interest. So over time, the knowledge that you accumulate actually has a compounding effect. And it has that effect for a simple reason. When you learn something new, you actually don't just learn this new thing, you learn so much from all of the previous things that you've learned. Learning changes the past. When you learn a new piece of information, loads of old information you have gets updated. So over time, a new piece of information gives you the new piece of information, but it also updates loads of past incorrect beliefs that you have, which leads to a compounding effect over time. But knowing that something's good for you isn't enough. One of the key takeaways I've got from running the procrastination program is that people don't do the things that they know should be good for them. People know they should be working on their business and they should be doing the things to scale or to reach their goals, eating healthily and exercising, but they don't do them. So knowing that something good enough isn't enough. Once you've got the logic in order, now you've got to get your emotions in order, because in the long run, it's not your logic that dictates your behavior. That's such a fallacy in the personal development productivity space. Using things like habit trackers or discipline and willpower, it may work in the short run, but it's not going to last in long-term change. That's when you need to get your emotions aligned. So the second step is to get your limbic system aligned with reading. First of all, stop reading books you don't enjoy reading. And second of all, start reading books that you do enjoy reading. It's really as simple as that. When you're reading a book that you don't enjoy, a book that you're forcing yourself to read, a book that you're not excited to pick up and devour, you're literally giving yourself learning disabilities. Think about it. You're having to use willpower as you're going through the book. You're only going to read a couple pages at a time and then you'll get bored. And your retention on the stuff you're reading is going to be abysmal. If you're not enjoying a book, you're literally giving yourself learning disabilities, compared to enjoying a book where you're going to read for hours at a time. You're going to devour the content. You're going to retain it all. You're actually going to apply it. And a little hack that I found that makes it far easier to enjoy reading books is by starting a curiosity playground. All this is a list of things that you're curious about. I'll put a Notion template in the description for the curiosity playground that I do. Whenever you hear an article recommended, a video recommended, a book recommended, even an author recommended, or a topic recommended, you make a huge list of things that you're curious about. Don't force yourself to read books you should be reading or that you think will be valuable. Just read whatever it is you want to read. Non-fiction, fiction, any topic, just read what you want to read. And you should view this as opportunity for you to play. This should be pleasurable. That's why I make the banner of the Notion page something fun and lighthearted to remind myself that this is just play. And what's interesting is the more that you go through your curiosity playground and start reading and learning different things, you'll notice that actually more things are added on. Because when you start knowing more things, you realize how much you don't know. And as you start learning, you realize how much there is for you to learn. And it's so nice to see your curiosity playground growing. Because at the start, there'll be a couple things you're curious about. But the more you go through these things you're curious about, it's going to open up so many more doors about things that you're curious about. So over time, you're going to get more and more curious and more excited to learn. It's going to start off difficult with not too many things you're curious about. It's going to end with you having a massive list of things that you just want to read non-stop. And now that you're logically and emotionally bought in, the habit should start to form effortlessly. You shouldn't have to force yourself to read. Use habit trackers, discipline, the 5-second rule. It should just form naturally because you find it pleasurable. The habit should just start. If the habit doesn't start, it's clear you're either not logically bought in, you don't think it's worth your time, or you're not emotionally bought in. You don't enjoy the act of reading enough. Now that you've started learning, the third step is to stop reading like a 100-year-old. Stop following the old-fashioned way of reading and get with the modern times. First of all, most people continue to read a book once they've fully understood the concept of the book. You've got to understand the place that authors come from when they're writing a book. A lot of them wrote a blog post, it did well with their audience, then they thought, oh, I should turn this into a book. But the book shouldn't be a book in the first place, it should be a blog post. If the audience resonated well with the blog post, it should be a blog post. And authors have word counts that they're trying to fill with books. So most books are put in the first chapter, and then the same thing's repeated multiple times throughout the rest of the book. So if you've understood a book, just move on, you've got what you needed out of the book. Second mistake that people make is they keep reading a book once they're not excited to read the book. If you're getting bored by a book, like we learned earlier, you're giving yourself learning disabilities. Don't feel like you have to finish the book. Don't set that rule on yourself. Where did that rule come from? If you don't want to read a book, don't read a book. Just pick up a different book and start reading a book that you are excited in. Don't feel obliged to finish a book. Read what you want to read, and if you want to read something else, read something else. And the third mistake that people make is they think that the only way for them to learn is by reading. This is the old-fashioned way of viewing things. Now we have the internet and we have access to a bunch of different tools that we can use to learn. And the new way of learning that I recommend to people is comprised of two different phases. It's modern learning and then deep learning. It starts by modern learning and then you can choose to go into deep learning if you want. Let me explain both of them. Modern learning comes from the assumption that most books shouldn't actually be books, and you can often get the main idea of a book in a lot shorter of a time than actually reading the book. It comes from a few different steps. First of all, before you read a book, you should watch the TED Talk from that author. Think about it. The author is literally distilling the main, most valuable concept of the book in a 5 to 10 minute TED Talk. So you can get the vast majority of the idea in the TED Talk instead of reading the book, and you're getting it straight from the author's mouth. Once you've gone through the TED Talk, now you start reading book summaries. You see, when you read a book, all you're getting is the author's perspective on an idea. Whereas where you read book summaries, you're getting multiple different people's perspective on the same idea. So you go from a 2D understanding of a concept to a 3D understanding of a concept. And you should always read more than one book summary, because sometimes people get a weird understanding of the idea, or they come at it from their own lens, which is fine. But once you start coming at the idea from multiple different lenses, that's when you really get a holistic understanding of what the idea actually is. And for book summaries, my favorite tool is Blinkist. There's a link in the description if you want to get that. There's a bunch of different non-fiction books that they summarize in 15 minutes, as well as listening to the audio. It's really useful. Or if you're just looking for free stuff, I recommend Samuel Thomas Davies. If I'm ever looking for a book summary, I'll see if he has one first. His book summaries are better than a lot of people's. And what I found is for most books, within an hour of reading, you can get 99% of the book instead of spending 12 hours reading the whole book. And actually, this often makes reading more enjoyable. Nowadays, our attention span is so fried, we find it difficult to sit down and read a book, really difficult. So instead of trying to change that behavior, in the early stages, if you're a beginner, it's better just to lean into that and let yourself get in the habit of learning in whatever way you find enjoyable most. Through bite-sized pieces of information, you'll still learn a lot, and then once you're in the habit of that, then you can start moving across to deep learning. I should note that all of the 1,000 books that I speed read haven't just been from summaries. I've read a bunch of different books, but I'll always start with modern learning, where you're reading summaries and the TED Talks and the videos from the author, and then I'll move into deep learning when I want to sell myself on the topic of the book. This is step 4. This is deep learning. So once you've done this modern reading, there'll be two different camps. Either you will have got the idea, you've completely understood it, you've internalized it, you're going to start applying it straight away. If that's the case, great, you can move on to the next idea. Or if you think this idea is so incredibly valuable, but you haven't emotionally understood the idea enough that you're going to actually implement it, now you can move on to deep learning. This is interesting. This is where we apply rigorous effort into understanding the concepts. And there's a really cool hack in to do this, and which I'll explain in a second, but the main reason this is beneficial is because the neural pathways in your brain are formed through exposure to the environment. The way your brain runs and the way your brain fires to an environment is created by your environment. So if you constantly expose yourself to certain ideas, your neural pathways are going to form around those ideas and they'll fire more effectively when the environment comes about that. So you can actually use books to sell yourself. Books are salesmen on specific ideas to increase the likelihood that you actually implement them. When you repeatedly hear how beneficial an idea is, you're going to be far more likely to actually use them. So use books as sales tools instead of as learning tools. At the end of the day, it's not about how many books you go through, it's about how many books go through you. So what deep learning is a time with no distractions where you really sit down, try and mold your brain around the specific concept. And the hack that I found incredibly beneficial is you read the book and you listen to the book through the audiobook at the exact same time. I use Audible for this. There's a link in the description if you want to get a free trial of Audible. And I read the book on the screen and I listen to the book at the same time. This way I'm getting visual learning through the screen and I'm getting auditory learning through the audio. I'm getting best of both worlds, and this really allows you to retain a large amount of information, stay focused on what you're doing. And because the audiobook is constantly playing, there's not the opportunity for you to get distracted when you're reading a book, or stop reading, or read slower, or read more quickly. It's really a way for you to get in the flow state and just let the information soak up into your brain. And I found this is an incredibly good hack at retaining and really getting a large amount of change made from reading books. And when you're doing this, you want to be applying deliberate practice. You want to be constantly pushing yourself past your comfort zone by increasing the speed of the audiobook. If you can get through a book at 2x speed or 3x speed, you're now putting the amount of time needed to get through the book in half or in a third. And yes, your retention is probably going to decrease, but the time made up by getting through the book quicker is definitely worth the sacrifice of a decrease in retention. And as you push the speed that you're learning up, you'll find yourself actively engaged the whole time, because you're having to actually concentrate in order to retain the information instead of letting yourself daydream when it's at 1x speed or 1.5x speed. So apply deliberate practice, try and get better at retaining information quickly, and now you're applying deliberate practice to reading, and this has been how I've been able to get through 1,000 books in a year from multiple different concepts and really understand these different concepts. Not reading them cover to cover, I view that as the old-fashioned way of reading, but really getting through a bunch of different ideas and upgrading your brain. Now, the fifth and final step is an action step. It's actually to execute on this. It's not enough just to hear this and think, oh, this is really valuable content, thanks, Andrew. Now is the time for you to actually apply this into your life and actually execute on it. So follow your curiosity, follow things that you're engaged with. And I want to end the video with a call to action. I don't do enough of these. You've heard me talking about in this video time theory and the procrastination program. We're actually now open for enrollment. You're going to have to apply to enroll. We don't just let anybody in. So click the link in the description if you want to apply to join the procrastination program. If you really want to level up, grow your business and stop procrastinating, you can just click that link. Apart from that, I appreciate you for making the end of the video, and I'll see you in the next one.